Welcome, everybody. This is I almost said the wrong name because I have so many shows online. This is our Emotional Intelligence Squared, and maybe it's Emotional Intelligence 2 live stream. I'm Scott Patton, your host, and our other host is Bob Juris. Hey, Bob, how are you doing today?
Good morning. Just great, Scott. Thank you.
I'm really excited to be doing this. For the last I don't know, year or 2 years, we've been creating a lot of emotional intelligence courses on Udemy in particular. And that's been our focus, is to be able to get certain aspects of the content out, whether it's relationship management or self-awareness or all the other aspects of emotional intelligence that's important in today's world. And because of that, we haven't been able to really spend the time that we want talking to our audience and having a place for our audience to go. So our purpose now is once a week to have this show, and we're live, or if you're watching the replay, obviously we're not, but you can leave a comment below. So feel free to leave a comment, leave a question. I'm sure that many of our audiences and our students are going to have lots of questions that they're going to want us to answer. We're going to be starting each show off with a rant or a little bit of training on or a discussion of emotional intelligence in the world today. And then when we're done that, we'll open up the phone lines, as they say on the radio. And you can, in other words, we'll at that point take all of your questions and move forward. So perhaps the best place to start right now, Bob, is let everybody know some of your background.
Okay, it's sort of a mixed background. I've got a number of master's degrees. I was a college professor for 35 years. I'm still recovering from that, but I taught psychology, adult education, and just about everything in business. I've worked as a psychologist. I've worked as a professor. I've worked as a coach. I've worked as a consultant. And I've gotten involved with emotional intelligence and just about all of the aspects of it for over 25 years now. I was going to say 20, but now that I think of it, it's 25.
Wow. And at this point, we've almost got 50,000 students in our emotional intelligence courses and over 775, I'll say 5-star reviews. I'm sure that there's 1 or 2 trolls in there that gave us a 1-star. And I'm really proud of the reception our students have given us and the enthusiasm that they've had for the courses. So we're not here to push the courses, but absolutely the #1 place to start is going to Udemy. Do a search on Bob. Robert Juris will show up better than Bob Juris, and take a look at the courses and then enroll, because it's the easiest way for you to start your journey in terms of improving your emotional intelligence. And I guess, Bob, that would be my first question to you is, just a second. Here we go. I want us to look like that. I didn't realize my overlay would disappear and it would default to something else. Is emotional intelligence, like when I think of the IQ, my understanding is you kind of got it, and I could be wrong on this, is you've got your IQ and you're sort of stuck with it for the rest of your life. And maybe there's certain things you can do to become smarter. But with emotional intelligence, is it possible to improve your level of emotional intelligence?
Well, you've got it exactly right, Scott. I kind of joke to make the comment, your IQ is about the same as your shoe size. Maybe if you've got a size 10 foot, you can fit into a 10.5, and maybe you can squeeze down to a 9.5, but it's going to be pretty consistent. If you look at people going to college, they have the prep courses that they kind of expand your IQ a little bit. And I emphasize a little bit. Now, here's the good news for everybody. IQ has very low corollary to success. So you and I were probably raised in a generation where you were taught that higher IQ people are going to succeed better and they're going to dominate the world, but that ain't necessarily so. Now, when we talk about EQ, which is why I got so excited with the concept, is your emotions are far more connected to your success, your achievement, your relationship, your happiness in life than your IQ is. And what was really exciting to me is it's changeable. So we can adjust that and we can work on areas and we can bring them up, which not only does it influence your success, but we can influence it.
Nice. Now that's the good news. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, can we, Bob, can we break it down into some sort of manageable pieces now? Like what are the main components in your mind?
Well, you and I, it's been such a privilege working with you, Scott, but you and
Thank
I
you.
have worked with the model that we developed. Basically, we start with self-awareness. How well do you know yourself, your values, your beliefs, your benchmarks? Can you tell me what emotions you're having? Can you tell me why you're having those? And the more self-aware, mindful that you become, the more you're able to take command of who you want to be as opposed to who everybody else decides you're going to be. Once you've worked with that self-awareness quadrant, and there's a lot in there, we usually try to start people with an assessment that shows them where you are. And our system is visual, it's activity-based, it's feed forward. So normally I try and tell people wherever you are, that's the starting place. It's not the end. After you figured out your self-awareness, these are my values, this is what's important, these are my emotions, this is what I'd like out of life, you move to self-management. I always like to tell people self-management is about becoming the you want to be. How do you set your goals? How do you take control? How do you discipline yourself? How do you focus? And what's always fascinating to me is people are like, well, you need to be honest and upfront and out there with everybody. And I kind of tell people, yes, but not all the time. If I'm sitting and having a bad day and I want to sit and cry and I'm sitting with, oh, my friend Scott's a really good guy. I can talk to Scott. And I start telling you my problems. Emotions are contagious. So
Yes.
being such a nice guy, you'll sit for an hour and you'll listen to me and hear my troubles and commiserate, sympathize with me. And then you'll walk away feeling sad. Poor Bob. And you were okay beforehand, and now you're feeling sad. And Bob isn't probably feeling much better. And you're sort of sitting there the next time I call him, do I really want to talk to Bob? He's going to make me feel sad. So you try and tell people you want to work on being somebody people can know, like, and trust. And your likability is about your emotional deal. What do people like about you? What do they enjoy? So emotions are about information and energy. And I always warn people when they're like, I shouldn't feel this way. I should, I could, you feel the way you do.
Yeah. 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 Actually, that's a really good point because you were reminding me of, I mean, you're in Florida. I'm in Colombia in the South America, and it's a hard time for many, many people. And especially here in Colombia, there's not the safety net and unemployment or furlough pay or whatever we want to call it that the government can give out. And they say they are, but then when you talk to people, nobody's got any of the money. So who knows where it went. And when I meet some people for the first time, or maybe the second time, there's sort of two groups of people. There's the people that are just happy, they're alive, and they're healthy right now. They may be a little hungrier than normal, but they generally seem to be really happy. And then there's a second group that are, I would say, more desperate, and they start off with the problem. Like they'll tell me, like, I have no food in my fridge, and I feel bad for them, but I can't buy 54 million people's worth of food and for their fridge, and I have to be, I don't know what I can do, right? I mean, there's a limit, and because I do help quite a few people down here, but when they start off with that, it really is like, I don't really want to be around this person, because they're starting off like you said, they're starting off on the wrong foot. That I don't like the fact that they're making me feel bad because I can't help them, because I like to help everybody, but I can't help them. So now it's kind of like every time I'm going to talk to those people, they're going to be telling me how awful things are. I know things are awful, and I really don't need them to tell me that, because there's nothing I can do. So all I'm going to do is feel bad for them, right? And the other thing that happened, and maybe we can talk a little bit about this because it really bothered me. Not that you're my therapist, but where I am in Medellin, it's the valley, and there's two mountains. I guess we're in the Andes, or we're in the beginning of the Andes, and on the other side of one of the mountains is a gorgeous place. They've made a park. There's a small town. There are trails. I've been up there a few times. It's beautiful. And the dream of one of the people that live up there is to start his own farm. So he's bootstrapping it. He's poor. He has nothing, but he's created these plots of planting that he's got for herbs and other things that he's growing. And he's trying to, make pizza and that. So he's really working hard to make the whole thing work. And so he posted it on a Facebook group that has to do with Medellin. So I said, oh, this is great. You make pizzas and everything you do, it sounds wonderful. I'm going to buy a pizza. So I bought a pizza to support him, right? And the pizza was delicious. And it was way too much. I should have ordered the smaller size, but that's beside the point. So it's kind of like now he knows who I am and he knows that I support him, right? And I do support him. So when he posts a few weeks later and he says, pictures of all the things that he's doing and everything else, plus a picture of his pizza, I go, delicious pizza. And of course he likes that. And then he starts a conversation with me about how much he needs financial support to continue growing his dream. And can you go to this page and it's like a Kickstarter clone and put some money in? And I was like, man, I was like supporting you and trying to lift you up in the group, and now you're asking me for money. And so I just felt like there was a lot of desperation, and he would have been better off if he'd messaged me and just said, hey, really appreciate your support, and a softer sell of like, I'm glad you enjoyed the pizza. If you ever want another pizza, let me know. As opposed to what I felt was like a hard sell. Now I'm thinking, I don't really want to raise my hand up again and say this guy is great, because now I'm going to have to put up with 15 messages asking for money.
Well, you get what you put out. When you start self-managing and people start getting aware of what they're putting out, what they're sending to people, if you want to have a pity party, you'll find some other very upset people who are going to share that party with you. One of the things that frightens me with people now, when we're talking about our current situation, is I hear some people say, my company can't guarantee me a job when this is over. I'm sitting with, I don't know who guaranteed you how many days you're going to be alive. But yet you're looking for a guarantee from the company of, And these days, part of what I like to try and tell just about everybody, and I know you're on board with this, is you've got to take personal responsibility. You've got to self-manage, because nobody is going to take care of you anymore. Whether that world ever existed, it doesn't anymore.
I think the world existed for 42 years because my dad got into the workforce at the beginning of that world. And so his parents and in-laws and everybody else were farmers in the mid Canadian prairies, right? Saskatchewan. So they were all like, if we don't grow the food, we starve. And then, of course, Grandma and Grandpa worked really hard to put, the kids that wanted to go to university in university. And, a few of them did out of that generation. And most of those people had a 40-year job. Yeah. And at the end of the 40 years, they had a fairly good pension. Well, they had pensions, both from the government and from the businesses that they worked for. And if they were, frugal, then they had a good retirement, because between the two pensions and what they had saved, and they owned their house and all that stuff, they lived that. And I watched my dad, and I got 20 years into it, and it ended for me, because I could see the writing on the wall, and I left before people were like kicked out. And maybe the last 40 years, those people that stayed in say the grocery store industry, they leave and they've got their good pension and they're pretty much set. So maybe it was 60 years, but I think definitely there's no doubt that it's gone now, and it's in more danger of going more backward now, in my opinion, than ever before. So this was a very short experiment in I don't know whether it was business or pensions or long term or working for one company, that just because before, if you go back 1,000 years, there was nothing like this. There certainly wasn't anything 2,000 years ago or even 200 or 300 years ago. So yeah. I think it was a failed experiment, I think, because in my mind it was too successful, and the powers anyway. I could say a whole bunch of things that I don't know anything about when it comes to it, but it just seems like it was a short period of time where that actually worked, and I don't know about, and it was a time of growth. I think that was the other thing. When you look at the way that things were in the 1940s in terms of just if you were in a town or a city and the way they are now, it's a huge, huge difference. And so when you have all this growth, you have, you can share a lot more of the pie, but when the growth stops, you can't, and it's dependent upon the pie growing at a rate that it no longer can sustain, then it falls apart.
Well, years ago when I worked as a college professor, one of the standard ambitions that I would hear over and over again from students is, I want to get my college degree. I want to work for IBM, Eastman Kodak, Disney, name the large company. I want to get into the management training program of that company. I want to move up the ranks and become an executive with name your company. And the reality is now you've got to self-manage because those management training programs are gone. The reality is the company won't love you back. You'll dedicate ridiculous amount of hours to the company. Gee, Scott, can you work this weekend for me? Can you work a few extra hours? And young and ignorant, you'll smile and say, oh yeah, sure, boss. And then the boss will smile and say, Scott, I owe you one. And it's like, oh, the boss owes me one. And then we've hit the world of today of, Scott, we've got to have layoffs because it's a rough time with COVID, and we're laying you off. And coming back to me and saying, Bob, you said you owed me one. Well, sorry, Scott, I'm going to have to owe it to you for the rest of my life because you're out of here and good luck in your next career. And if you don't self-manage, you're sort of wandering on the street going, woe is me. What do I do now? And where's the job? And frighteningly, too many of the young people come from our age group where you're like, well, I want job security. And I kind of scratch my head these days. You want job security? Exactly where is that? I think that's only with self-management. It doesn't exist anymore. There's no company that guarantees you'll be here forever.
Yeah, that's really, really true. And as the larger companies get larger and larger and they gobble up the smaller companies, because it's almost like the strategy is you start a business, you get it to a certain level, and you sell it for $100 million to AT&T or IBM or Microsoft or Google or Facebook even. And then you're like, I'm set. I got my $100 million. I don't need to worry about anything. And then all the people that were working in your company get absorbed into the old company. And then it's kind of like, well, we already have an accountant, Bob, so we don't need you. Thanks you very much for your service. Well, we don't really need a programmer, Bob, because, we've got 3,000 of them already, and they know us and our system, and we owe them one. We don't owe you one. We just bought you, so bye, and away you go. And these things can take time, right? Because so I love comics, right? And DC Comics are part of Time Warner, which was part of AT&T, and AT&T said to Time Warner, well, a whole bunch of people got to go. And since I'm only paying attention to the comic stuff, I only hear about the comic layoff. But there was this massive purge in the whole DC universe, and thousands of people. And so now you've got these comic artists and writers that are like, well, I used to be writing Batman, and now there's no Batman comics, so I'm not writing Batman anymore. And what do I do? And if they self-managed, like you talked about, they would have been working on their own comic, because we're in a world now where you can sell your own comic. You can self-publish. It happens on Amazon all the time, right? And there's a lot of independent publishers now that they're not nearly as popular as Marvel or DC, but they still have some pretty significant intellectual properties that they're creating. Well, in fact, one of the top cable shows, I think, for the last decade has been The Walking Dead. Well, it's based on a comic called The Walking Dead. So the guy that wrote that comic, and it has nothing to do with Marvel or DC, has made a fortune. And so he's self-managed, right? So if you're a comic book writer in this case, and you're just thinking, well, DC is going to pay me enough for me to live on for the rest of my life because I'm writing Batman, all of a sudden, and you do nothing else, then you have a real problem. Whereas if you say, you know what, I have this skill, I'm doing this in my job, and I can actually create a side hustle, right, or a side job or a side business, and then if something happens to my main income, I've got this thing that's making me $500 or $1,000 or $1,000 or $2,000 a month, and I can ramp it up so that maybe it'll replace all of my income. Of course, if you save that and lived off your income, then you would have a buffer, and you'd be self-managing your finances, so you'd be okay for a certain period of time at least.
Well, you need to self-manage these days, and you need to kind of develop a world of possibilities, not what's impossible. I'm going to kind of embarrass myself a little bit here. When you and I first met, Scott, I was kind of the retired college professor, and I've taught for 35 years. That means I've taught about 35,000 students. And you had a lot more wisdom about teaching than I did. And you're sort of looking at me with, we can do 70,000 in 2 years. And I'm looking at you like, are you crazy, Scott? I spent 35 years of my life, and I taught 35,000 students, and you wound up explaining to me and showing me that that world of possibility has changed. Now you can, and I know you and I have been amazed with the numbers, but it's like you've now reached almost 70,000 students in 2 years, as opposed to what you did in 35.
That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Now, the difference, of course, is that you had those students physically with you, whereas we're talking about a virtual classroom where people all over the world can come into your life, and that's sort of the game has changed that way, right?
But the paradigms are constantly shifting, which is why I've embraced emotional intelligence and try and tell everybody focus there, because the other half is about empathy and relationships. And unless you make those relationships, and I mean, I'll applaud you over and again, it's like I'm dealing with a structure of, wow, the university system is in trouble and we're struggling, and I've done 35,000 students in this many years, and someone like yourself comes along and says, why university? And I'm like, well, I'm a college professor. And it's like, then I get the joy of having someone like you say, and I repeat the question, why university? If you want to teach people, if you want to make a difference, you don't need that platform.
Right.
And I know it took me a while to get used to, no, I don't need that platform. And then you start seeing people in the world today of what's changing, what can you capitalize? And with the self-management and the relationships, part of what the dynamic that I tell people is you can either cry of that tradition, that stability that I love so dearly is fading, or you can get excited about the fact of, wow, there's going to be a whole lot of new opportunities out here that didn't even exist 10 years ago.
Yeah, there absolutely is lots of opportunity. And I think one of the keys with emotional intelligence is it helps us to kind of open up to those opportunities or Like when I was a grocery store manager for 20 years, I didn't understand how anybody could make money who didn't sell pork and beans. And I remember talking to my refrigerator repairman, and I just said to him one day, one of the dumbest questions, not the dumbest, but one of the dumbest questions I ever asked, which was like, I don't understand how you make money. And he looks at me and he says, Scott, I send you an invoice every week or two for fixing your freezers. And it was an old store and they broke down a lot. And so you know how I make money. But it was just this, like, I just had these blinders on, right? And unfortunately, it took some tragedies in my life to kind of take those blinders off and look and realize that I needed to change what I was doing. And I think that having taking the courses on emotional intelligence, focusing on those soft skills are really, really crucial, because when you need help, and you've been throwing everybody around you anchors and they all sink, and now you're in the ocean and you need help, nobody's going to throw you anything but an anchor if that's what you've been putting out. And nobody realizes that. Like we used to always say, in my company, be nice to the people that you pass on your way up, because you're going to be saying hi to them on your way down.
Yeah, it's part of what fascinates me is why I've embraced emotional intelligence so much is when you start looking at happiness and everything else. I like to jokingly make the comment that the first half of your life is probably spent getting things. Big house, nice car, da 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 da. And you're always chasing the next bigger, better thing. And once you've got the things, well, you've got to get the security system on the house. You've
Right.
got to hire a gardener. You've got to do this, and you find out your happiness quotient hasn't gone up at all, but you've got more stuff. And then when you get older, I kind of joke the second half of your life is spent getting rid of those things, and then you find out the value is in experiences and relationships. It's not about the stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bob, our plan is to do half-hour shows. We're at 27 minutes, and I think what you just said is a great time for us to close out, because it's
Sounds good, Scott.
that's a really good piece of wisdom. So if you're 20, understand that you're spending the next 20 years collecting stuff, plus the stuff that you got from your mom and dad for the last 20 years. And then when you're going to be spending the last half of your years getting rid of all of that stuff. So you can short circuit that. And can people do that? Like, because that's what you just said was my life. Like, everything happened exactly like that. So we're looking for happiness. What would you say to a 20-something or a millennial in terms of how they can find happiness in today's world?
I think it's a matter of focusing on those relationships and the experiences. And it's not about the souvenirs you get from life. I've had the privilege of knowing you, Scott, and I've always enjoyed your travel lifestyle.
Thank you.
Where I ask you about where you are, and you've been kind enough to share all these different places with me. And I've told people, which would you rather have, all those experiences or a large house with all the souvenirs from all those places, but you probably can't afford traveling anymore because you spent the money on the souvenirs?
Well, I know what my answer would be, and that would be the experiences for sure.
I think you've got it right, Scott.
Thanks. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. Really appreciate you and having you with us. And if you look in the description, there should be links there to our Udemy courses. Take a look. It's a full smorgasbord of, find out where you feel like you need to work on, what areas of your life you need to work on. And we're talking soft skills here. We're not talking about like how to program or how to do accounting or anything like that, but we're talking about the skills that are going to help you go through life more confidently, happier, and more successfully, right? Because this whole, people need to know, like, and trust you. So how do you create that likability? How do you create that trust? How do you create that, people feel like they know you, being authentic? Oftentimes people put up these masks and this is who they want everyone to be. And we're very good at identifying masks and non-masks. And if people think that all you're showing them is a mask of who you are, it brings up a lot of things that have nothing to do with trusting and liking, if that's fair to say. And that's a great place for us to start, and being authentic. And those are the things that we're going to be talking about in our upcoming shows. So if you're on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe and the bell so you'll be notified whenever we go online. And if you can join us live, great. If you see the replay, then no worries. And if you're on Facebook or Twitter or Periscope, then make sure that you join our Facebook group, Emotional Intelligence 2, and probably where you're seeing this, unless you're seeing this on my Facebook feed. So with that, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.